Unhappy in Brazil, Bohm traveled to Israel, where he accepted a position at the Technion in Haifa. While in Israel, Bohm also met and married the woman who was to become his lifelong partner, Sarah Wolfson.
David had been exiled to Brazil after the House and American Activities business. And he was never happy there. You know, there were many problems, he felt. And then he was offered an opportunity in Israel. And of course, it was a new state at the time, you know, I mean, and also, of course, he was Jewish. Maybe he saw this, you know, as a good opportunity. And he'd only been there a couple of weeks when he was invited to a party. And Cyril was present, and she spotted him from across the room and immediately was interested in this young man. I would describe Cyril as a very motherly person. She wanted to look after people. She liked to feed people, you know. She was very sociable and including everyone. And
my wife and I used to go to the public library, and she discovered a book by Krishnamurti, and she read in there the words, the observer and the observed. And I had been interested in that because in quantum mechanics that is a key question in the sense that because of this undivided wholeness, the two cannot be separated.
And she opened the book, and in it immediately saw references to things with regard to the observer and the observed. And she was startled because that's what David was working with in physics. And Cyril is trying to understand how could this be that this Indian philosopher is also talking about the observer and the observed.
From Israel, Bohm moved to Bristol, and it was here that his fundamental ideas on the nature of reality began to take fresh impetus. In Bristol, Bohm left his hidden variable ideas behind and was now focusing on the fact that despite decades of work, physicists had been unable to reconcile quantum theory with Einstein's relativity.
He's left behind his hidden variables. He's left that behind, and now he's asking, why has there been decades of work on relativity and quantum theory, the two key theories of physics? Why are there two? Why is it not just one theory, one unified theory, as Einstein had hoped there would be? And so he's wondering, do we need a new theory? Is that the issue, or is it a completely new order to physics, a new approach? And that was what he began to think about, what he called the implicate order. We need a radically new order. So that was where his thinking was when he arrived in Britain.
At this time, Bohm also developed a new interest that was to have a deep impact on his life and his approach to science. As we have seen, quantum physics has long been concerned with the process of wave-function observation. And Bohm was very much aware that depending on the conditions of an experiment, that electrons would behave differently depending on what was being observed.
When I was younger, I felt that in the beginning that science would surely be a source of benefiting mankind, and I had no question about it. I began to feel that something beyond science would be needed to approach this question. You see, that science alone could not guarantee that it would be used for benefiting mankind. The scientific impulse, though in the beginning I thought it would, just truth alone. Right? Then I began to look into philosophy and Eastern and Western and so on, and some people with religious ideas. I mean, just simply looking at it when I was in Bristol in England.
In quantum physics, in the study of the behavior of the electron, you have this very mysterious property that the very act of observing the electron changes it in such a way that there's a link between the apparatus of observation and what is observed. And Krishnamurti made a similar statement about events in the psychological field, which is that the act of observing something inwardly, some emotion or some attitude or whatever, the very seeing of it changes it, so that the inward sense of an observer, myself, who's looking, is inextricably connected with whatever I'm looking at. And so Krishnamurti expressed that in sort of an aphoristic fashion by saying the observer is the observed.
Which in essence took the questions that David was working with in physics and flipped them into the human realm, the realm of human experience, human life, human difficulties. David felt that Krishnamurti was onto something of great importance that could help to complete the sense of wholeness that he was trying to bring to light with his work in physics.
Krishnamurti's approach aligned with Bohm's own views on the nature of thought, of reality, and on the nature of consciousness in particular, seen as a coherent whole, which is never static or complete, but a continuous process of enfolding and unfolding. Both Bohm and Krishnamurti questioned their respective backgrounds, ultimately rejecting the orthodoxy they had once felt would provide answers to humanity's big questions.
In his early life, he was kind of adopted by this organization called the Theosophical Society, which discovered him when he was a 14-year-old boy on the beach in South India. And they predicted that he was going to become, this great, what they called world teacher and bring a new kind of consciousness to mankind. And they cultivated him and nourished him in this role. But somewhere about the age of 25, 27, maybe a little bit earlier than that, he began to seriously question all of this and find it very limiting, similarly to the way Bohm had found the scientific orthodoxy to be limiting.
So Bohm wanted to meet this man, and they had this meeting, and I'm told partway through it, Krishnamurti was supposed to stood up, with pleasure or enthusiasm or whatever, and said, "You have seen it, sir." So that Bohm had seen it, and then Bohm began to have more meetings with Krishnamurti. He became a trustee of Krishnamurti's school at Brockwood Park.
It was at Brockwood Park that Bohm and Krishnamurti entered into a series of conversations whose themes covered the ending of time, the nature of mind, cosmic order, and much more over a 25-year period.
And from Krishnamurti's perspective, it was very important for him because he felt as though he had a tremendous reservoir of insights to share with the world, but he felt like he couldn't necessarily bring it out by himself. He needed people to ask him. He needed people to dig and to question him. And of all the people he ever met, Bohm was the best at that. And I think Bohm, to some extent formed a similar function for Krishnamurti, because Krishnamurti could raise questions with him that might not occur in another context.
The point made by Krishnamurti was that the problems of mankind originate in thought itself, in consciousness itself, you see. And I was previous to that, I had grown up believing that poverty was the main problem of mankind, and science would help me eliminate that. And I could see that no matter how far science went, it probably wouldn't, and even if it did, it wouldn't really it wouldn't really make mankind happy.
I remember I once asked Bohm that, so what do you think was the main contribution of Krishnamurti? And if I remember it correctly, Bohm said something like that. Krishnamurti kind of pointed out that thought is an actual movement in our lives. It's a physical movement, a physiological movement, and it has a tremendous power. It's behind almost all our problems.
And we have to give attention to that manner in which thought is participating and shaping what we observe in order to understand how our whole mind is working, especially with respect to conflicts which occur between you and me, between my country and another country, and also conflicts which occur inwardly.
And there, then, of course, for Krishnamurti was suggesting that if you are able to be quiet, the deeper layers of reality might open up for you.
So in that state of mind, the mind is not just blank or, not doing anything. It's very active. The thinking process doesn't have to do with thought or recognition or knowledge, but is in a state of just perception, awareness, attention, maybe you could even say receptivity to truth.
There might have been many reasons Bohm was drawn to Krishnamurti. The ones that are apparent to me, Bohm perceived the wholeness of life. He perceived life as one indivisible whole, including nature, including consciousness. And in Krishnamurti, he found someone who also had this notion.
Krishnamurti, who was actually addressing the separation of the observer and the observed, in the same way as the wholeness in quantum theory was saying you can't make a separation between the system that you're looking at and the apparatus, which is the old traditional way of doing it, that somehow these things formed a whole. But rather than saying you can't develop concepts for it, what David was trying to do was to develop concepts. Now, to develop those concepts, you can't develop it within the scientific context. You've got to go outside to a wider set of concepts. And he found in Krishnamurti a way of discussing this more general question.
I remember one day we were here in Italy and he said to me, do you think I should give up doing physics and just devote myself to Krishnamurti? And my reply was, can a fish exist outside the goldfish bowl? So but that was it. He was that extreme that maybe he should devote himself completely to having his own brain transformed.
Having settled permanently in the UK, it was while at Birkbeck College in London that Bohm formed one of the most enduring science partnerships of his life with physicist Basil Hiley. And he also had an unexpected and welcome encounter with a forgotten theory, and that encounter changed everything.
At that time, David Bohm was developing a new idea which was called structure process. That basically we want to start with process, not particles moving in space-time, but a process from which both particles and space-time can emerge. Very radical ideas. Chris Dewdney and Chris Philippides came up to me and said, why don't you talk about the 52 paper? And that's when I said, because I think it's wrong. And that's when Chris said to me, Basil, have you read the paper? And I then had to agree that I hadn't.
It had been decades since the physics orthodoxy had blackballed Bohm and his hidden variables. It would take a new team of mavericks to unearth this critical work and resurrect it for a new generation.
Well, I got to know David Bohm quite well when I was a lecturer at Birkbeck College. But we had many very interesting discussions, and Bohm was somebody who I got a lot from. I always thought that he was very much like a wave function himself, that you'd ask a question, you see, a very specific question, and he would be very focused and give you a deep, very focused answer to that question. And then it would start to spread out, and it would encompass a little more about physics, and it spread out, and then about philology and about human nature and so on. And I'd get a bit lost about what's going on. So I needed another question. I'd ask him another question, and whoop, the conversation would focus itself very deeply on this particular point, and he would give a very succinct answer to that, and then again he would spread out like this. So it's just the way a wave function, as you measure it, is the particle here, and whoop, you see, and then it spreads out again like this.
They'd finally developed sufficient computing power needed to run the complex mathematics required to describe Bohm's hidden variables.
I think it'd be a very valuable thing if we could show clearly how Bohm's 52 theory worked in the two-slit experiment, because obviously the two-slit experiment is the iconic experiment in the interpretation of quantum theory. And so, yeah, Basil went off, read the papers. I set about calculating the particle trajectories for this, and Chris Philippides produced the quantum potential picture.
And that's what Chris was absolute master at, was actually developing computer programs to actually simulate this, and let's have a look at what is going on here.
When we put the two together, I mean, we were initially, I think, quite staggered by how amazing this story was, which had never been told in any sort of clear, detailed way.
And there were the trajectories for the two-slit experiment. Wow!
You could actually see in the images that we produced exactly how you could have particle trajectories in the two-slit experiment and account for interference, something, of course, which is forbidden in normal quantum theory. You could actually see how the thing worked exactly. You could follow individual particles as it was affected by this potential through space, and the quantum potential would guide the particles into the bright interference fringes.
Wherever there was a dip in the quantum potential, that's the rate of change of a potential, which is a force, and the trajectories would jump across the ditch, and when they were on the plateaus, they would just come straight. And the end result was gathering these trajectories, which explained completely the interference pattern.
There was a physicist, Franco Celleri, who was particularly supportive of this work once he'd learnt about it. And he referred to these movies as the hard porn of physics, in a sense, because you know, they would be censored by the orthodoxy. You shouldn't be able to see this stuff, and yet here we were projecting it in front of them.
At that stage, when Dave was still alive, he saw these trajectories and these quantum potential, and his eyes actually lit up. Because he had not seen them. He'd written about them, but he had not seen them. And then we started discussing the quantum potential. What could it mean? And this quantum potential energy only functions when quantum phenomena appear. That is, in the particle approaching two slits, it is the quantum potential that organizes the way the individual trajectories work. So there is a dynamic whole process going on in which the quantum potential appears.
If you're looking at interpretations or ways of looking at quantum mechanics, my view is that probably the Bohm-Hiley way of looking at quantum mechanics has the most satisfactory ontology. So you have a picture of what constitutes reality without changing quantum mechanics.
The Bohmian theory made a clear prediction about the non-locality of the world. What is non-locality? Non-locality is really, to put it in simple words, the profound discovery of the interconnectedness of the universe at the fundamental level of quanta. Now, that conflicts deeply right away with relativity theory, where it says, no, the speed of light is limited, everything is local, nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, so how could everything be instantaneously interconnected in the universe? And that's the big clash that we have today, and that's why also Bohm's theory of hidden variables, which are non-local, has really been rejected from the start.
It seems strange to us, and I stress the word seems, but if we want to make sense of a theory, that matters also. And sometimes when a theory seems strange, we get past it, and other times when it seems strange, it's pointing us to something that we haven't understood well enough.
It really says that there exists a hidden regime of reality in which everything is interconnected, but no person, even in the future, will be able to access that domain and make and control it. So this is also what the mystical traditions tell us, that we must be humble in front of reality, that there will always be domains of reality that will remain beyond science, beyond the scientific method, will remain beyond access by scientific agents. And if the quantum potential is discovered in this way and non-locality is proven, then the existence of that domain is proven.
Remember, we're talking about wholeness. We have to have wholeness in here. Here we agree with Bohr. Bohr pointed out that it was very important. The new feature that quantum mechanics introduces is a kind of wholeness, which means we cannot analyze things by cutting them up into little bits as we do in classical physics. But what we can do is, if we want to try and cut it up, that the way one bit goes into the next bit actually involves unfolding into the whole and then enfolding back again into a particular region. And so you get this idea of unfolding, enfolding, unfolding, enfolding. So what looks like a continuous trajectory is actually a series of foldings and unfoldings.
I tried to get some idea of what might be the process which was implied by the mathematics of the quantum theory. And this process is what I call enfoldment, that the mathematics itself suggests a movement in which any particular element of space may have a field which unfolds into the whole, and the whole folds and enfolds into it. Right?
What David and I have done is to open up the discussion, which I find when I'm talking to young people that they're very interested in trying to proceed further with these ideas. In other words, some of them have actually got it, as I put it. They know in their basic feelings that this is an interesting way to go.
The lab at University College London is at the centre of experiments to prove the existence of the quantum potential.
If the quantum potential exists in this way, then that really is the first evidence for the profound interconnectedness of the physical universe at a very deep fundamental level. That would revolutionize our scientific worldview. It would validate those views of unification, those views that speak to the holism of the universe. And it truly would be a confirmation of a kind of holism that religions and spiritual systems and mystical systems have intuited for many, centuries and millennia even.
So what does all this mean for you, for me, the universe, and everything? Bohm suggests that out of perceived emptiness, out of the so-called vacuum state, particles interact with, respond to, and are informed by an information potential which allows the cosmos to emerge.
So it's the information, informing action of the quantum potential that makes it possible for the physical universe to be.
Everything we know and everything we will come to know is already in formation, waiting to unfold into manifest reality. It's the implicate waiting to become explicate.
We aren't just things in space, we are places of transformation. And furthermore, our relationship with others, but with all phenomena, is very much a question of our relative positions. And I think that was something else that really deeply affected me about Bohm's work, the participant nature of the observer in the emerging of what we call reality. The way that quantum cloud works is that you are the determiner of what you see. This is a mess of, I think that, of elements that are both particles and hopefully trajectories that come together, and depending on where your position is, either in a boat or walking along the side of the Thames, and depending on the time of day, you will see or not see the possibility of a body. Quantum physics invites us to be participators in that emerging of a world. And it has very, very fundamental, I think, both philosophical, spiritual, and political implications, which are essentially that each of us is a co-producer of a world, that each of us is a co-producer of a possible future. The work of people like Einstein, Bohm, they are like huge windows opening in the imagination to a way of dealing with life and the things we encounter within it freshly and, in a sense, with the right level of uncertainty.
The present ego identity is based, I think, on a wrong mode of thought, you see, in which a person identifies with his thoughts and with his body and with things, do you see? And which means that he's creating an illusion, right? That this self which people feel they have is only a show. It is not really there, but it is such a convincing show that everybody acts as if it were there, and that gives it an apparent reality. One of the most essential points of the scientific spirit is to acknowledge the fact or the interpretation of the fact, whether you like it or not. That is not to engage in wishful thinking or not to reject something because you don't like it.
Is it possible scientifically to define this wholeness?
Well, not really completely. Wholeness is an attitude or an approach, but it can be given a scientific realization, you see.
I think two levels: interdependency. Firstly, external things, different nations, different country, environment, and human being, other animals, everything interdependent. So now, according to that reality, we have to take care about the whole world and environment.
We are internally related to everything, yes, not externally related. Consciousness is an internal relationship to the whole. We take in the whole and we act toward the whole. And that internal, whatever we have taken in, determines basically what we are.
When we're passing through some sort of forest, no bird, we feel something missing. When we're passing through some birds singing, some birds flying, then we feel more full. So that's now the reality. So interdependency on that level.
Bohm's model of the implicate and explicate, I think, is talking about how the subject-object split, duality, emerges from a ground which Lao Tzu would call the Tao, which is non-subject, non-object, but a unity, a wholeness.
Ancient Indians only used mind or wisdom and sometimes meditation, no instrument. Now modern science use instrument.
Science is whatever people make of it. You see, science has changed over the ages, and it's different now from a few hundred years ago, and it could be different again. Now, there's no intrinsic reason why science must necessarily be measurement. This is another historical development which has come about over the past few centuries. It's entirely contingent and not absolutely necessary.
So far we know is part. Still they're limitless. So reality, we have to sort of investigate. So David Bohm, I think really something like opener of our mind. So grateful.
In all the areas that he worked in, he was constantly pushing. In physics, in dialogue, in consciousness.
He became a scientist, I believe, in order to benefit humanity. I think his mission was always leading up to a transformation for human society, overcoming the fragmentation that we experience, towards having the experience of a new interconnectedness among us all to solve problems together, overcoming the divisions. So in that sense, he represented a truly holistic, integrated vision of a human being. And I think as that, he can serve as a model for future generations.
It's a revolution. It has radical implication about how we live our life, how we interact with the earth, how we interact with each other. And that revolution is unfinished.
If we aspire to go beyond our present state of consciousness, if we truly want to be happier, to love and know ourselves better, to regain meaning and wholeness, the old disciplines only serve to deepen the illusion of manifest reality. We must look beyond the veil of form to a realization of oneness, present in you, in me, the universe, and everything. When you grasp this, it will put you on the threshold of what is real and your place in reality. Reality is wholeness, undivided wholeness, and this fact has yet to dawn on billions of people.